Welcome to the Simply Financial podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Calandra. I have a question for you. The question is, are you in the American middle class? I asked this question and start the podcast with this question because I recently reviewed some research from the Pew Research Center. Pew is P-E-W, by the way. They did an analysis of government data and they found that 52% of U.S. households live in the middle income tier. They also found that 29% of households are in the lower income tier and 19% of households are in the upper income tier. So this classification that Pew Research uncovered means that the middle income tier is roughly a range of $40,500 of income up to $122,000 of income. Also found that the average income in the United States is about $87,000. And the number that you're going to hear more in the press is the median household income is $61,000. So just a quick education. What median average is, it means half are above 61,000 and half the households are below 61,000. Where average is, of course, you add up all the income and then divide it by the number of households. That's why the two numbers are different. But it's commonplace for folks to look at it as a median, how many people are above and below as opposed to average. I don't know if the average tells you a lot because the 1% skews the statistics so much, but the median income is $61,000. So location matters a lot with this. So I want you to think about this with me. If you take the midpoint between $40,000 of income and $122,000 of income, you're pretty much at that average I spoke about, $80,000, $82,000 a year. But location matters, as I said. $80,000 a year in, say, Mississippi or Alabama or rural parts of Montana, Wyoming, is much different than $80,000 in other locations. As listeners know, I live in Connecticut. Connecticut is a state that has a high level of income coupled with high expenses, high standard of living. Part of that is a very high tax burden. But $80,000 is different in different places. So location really matters a lot when you think about being in the middle class. Being in the middle class in lots of sections of this country is pretty comfortable and doable. There are other places where it is very difficult. Major cities like San Francisco, New York are prime examples. So a few thoughts, and I don't really have any data to back this up. Maybe I'll do this on a different upcoming podcast, but I want to make a few observations about this because as many of you know, I'm not a fan of the media. I think that they don't serve the American public very well these days. But it's important to note that the United States, for all of its faults, still has a lot of mobility where somebody might count today be in the lower income, but then in the future they'll be in the upper income, and then maybe when they retire they're in the middle income tier. People tend to move around. There are, of course, there are groups of people that are families that seem to be multi-generationally in the lower income tier, and that's a problem. But there is, despite that issue, many, many more instances of people moving up and down the classification between lower, middle, and upper. And I think about my life. I'm 50 now, and early in my career, I was in lower income. And then there was parts of my life where I was in middle income. I am fortunate now that I am in the upper income category. I know lots of my clients, most of my clients, have spent time in all three categories over the course of their lifetime. It's not that unusual. It's part of the magic, if you will, of the U.S. economic system. These are not static things. They're not stagnant. They do change over time for most people. Think about your own life and loved ones and close friends. I think you'll agree most people do bounce around over the course of their lifetime. The second point I want to make about this is that income is not necessarily reflective of wealth. The work that we do with clients here at Elliott Wealth Management as we help clients achieve their financial goals, hopefully help them win with money, one of the things we talk about is that income is not representative of wealth. Wealth is different. That's the amount of assets you have once you pay off what you owe. That's your net worth. And income is not always indicative of somebody's wealth, whether they're rich or not. I have met many people over the course of my career that generate wonderful incomes. But over the course of time, it hasn't amounted to much in terms of wealth. Either they spent it or divorce hammers away at people's wealth. It's usually a setback. For any number of reasons, people could have a very healthy income, but not have much to show for it on the wealth side. Of course, the work that we do, the work that I do as a certified financial planner, is to try and battle against that so that you use your income to increase your assets to build a nest egg so you have financial security. Income is not necessarily reflective of wealth. There are also instances on the opposite where I have met and worked with people that do not necessarily make a lot of money in their lifetimes, but for any number of reasons, they're good savers. They live beneath their means. They may have gotten an inheritance or a legal settlement. They may have assets that well outpace what you would, at first glance, think they would be able to achieve with modest or even low incomes. So again, I know I said it twice, but it's really important. Income is not necessarily reflective of wealth. And when you hear the media and people talk about income and the middle class, they seem in many instances to make it as the end all to be all, and that's not the case. Let me give you one last example while I'm on a little bit of a roll, if you'll indulge me. A lot of retirees have a lot of assets, but because they're retired, they might not spend a lot of money. They may live very peaceful, secure, happy, content lives, but they may not be generating much in the way of taxable income. So if you just look at the income, you might say, wow, look, you're not doing very well. They're not living the American dream, but they may have sizable assets. They may even be millionaires. It just might be that the way that it is structured, not much of it is showing up as taxable income. Very, very important point. The next thing I want to say is that the look at whether you're in the middle class or the upper income level or the lower income level does not necessarily factor into lifestyle. One example of this is there's a movement in the United States, which I'm a bit of a fan of. It's called the FIRE movement, F-I-R-E. It stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. And there is a pretty big contingency in this FIRE movement that talks about living a fairly simple lifestyle, not to be chasing the biggest house, the best car, lavish vacations. And if you want to pursue FIRE in that way, it's not a requirement. Often they'll talk about, when I look at their Facebook page and some of their books and some of the podcasts I listen to, they'll talk about being happy retiring early and having a $40,000 or $50,000 income. Now that's at the lower edge of the middle class range, but I think most of us could agree that that is not an huge income level. But just looking at these classifications doesn't take into account lifestyle. If somebody chooses to retire or have more free time and are content and purposefully choose their work-life balance, their income-time balance in a way that they find fulfilling and satisfying and the achievement of their goals, who could argue with that? I'm not going to argue with that. That's great. May not be for me. You as a listener may not want that for yourselves or your children, but there are a lot of people in America that fall into that category, and the middle class classification really doesn't factor into somebody's chosen lifestyle. Now, in contrast, if somebody would like to earn more and build wealth, but for any number of reasons, lack of education, broken families, poor health, whatever, that's disappointing, and we want to root for those people to have greater success. But again, the classification does not factor in lifestyle. And again, I want to also point out about location that somebody that lives in certain parts of the country and are at, let's say, $100,000, sort of the upper portion of the middle class tier, you could live a very, very nice, fulfilling life with lots of slack in your budget in parts of the country. And again, looking at middle class doesn't factor that in, because $100,000, if you live in Manhattan or in San Francisco metro area, it's a completely different matter. So I wanted to revisit the location counts when looking at the limitations of who's in the middle class and who's not. So thank you for listening today. I hope you got some good value out of looking at the question, are you in the middle class? And if you are in the middle class, do you aspire to be in the upper income tier? If so, there's probably a pathway. I'm supremely confident there's a pathway for you to achieve getting into the upper income tier. And aside from that, there's a path for increased wealth, to become more affluent, to build a sturdy, growing nest egg so you have increased financial security. This is the work we do at Elliott Wealth Management Services. So check out our website. It's www.elliottwealth.com. And my final ask is if you could subscribe to the podcast, the Simply Financial Podcast, that would be great. Please know I will be back with you on the next episode of the Simply Financial Podcast very soon. Thanks for listening to today's episode.
The views expressed are not necessarily the opinion of SagePoint Financial Incorporated and should not be construed directly or indirectly as an offer to buy or sell any securities mentioned herein. Investing is subject to risks, including loss of principal invested. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. No strategy can assure a profit nor protect against loss. Please note that individual situations can vary. Therefore, the information should be relied upon when coordinated with individual professional advice. Please note the information being provided is strictly as a courtesy. When you link to any of the websites provided here, you are leaving this website. We make no representation as to the completeness or accuracy of the information provided at these websites, nor is the company liable for any direct or indirect technical or system issues or any consequences arising out of your access to your use of third-party technologies, websites, information, and programs made available through this website. When you access one of these websites, you are leaving our website and assume total responsibility and risk for your use of the websites you are linking to. Securities and advisory services are offered through SagePoint Financial Incorporated, member FINRA SIPC. Insurance services offered through Elliott Wealth Management, LLC, not affiliated with Sage.